So I got a chance to talk to a bunch of voters in New Hampshire, including folks that came to the show. Thank you. When I was there for the primary, a bunch of folks who were undecided, some late deciders. A few things really struck me. One is that people really have strong and positive feelings about multiple Democratic candidates. That came up time and time again. And two, the thing that people are obsessed with, and this is borne out by the data, is beating President Donald Trump. Of course, they're obsessed with the idea there's a single correct answer to the question, who is the best to take on Trump? And a lot of voters feel like it is their job to figure out the answer to that question. NBC News exit polls, 63% of New Hampshire Democratic primary voters said the most important thing was that the nominee can beat Trump. Only a third said it was more important the nominee agree with their views. But the evidence when it comes to who is the best to beat Trump, who is the most, quote, electable candidate, is just, and I'm telling you this, having pored over this, very muddled and not really clear. So is this electability focus driving Democratic voters insane? Joining me to talk about what is going on is Nick Confessori, national investigative reporter from the New York Times, and Christina Greer, associate professor of political science at Fordham University, who has a fascinating and very well-timed new piece focused on electability in the Daily Beast titled Black Voters Turn to Mike Bloomberg. Let's start there, because you wrote this piece the day before a bunch of national polls came out that showed Bloomberg surging with black voters. And you said, I'm picking this up among people I'm talking to. What is your understanding of the calculation that's happening there among certain black voters who are sort of leaning towards Bloomberg?
Right. So to be clear, this is not an endorsement of Bloomberg.
Yeah,
I'm just having conversations with folks.
Right.
Exactly. And so I felt like, in a multi-class series of conversations, there were a lot of people who were saying, well, Bloomberg versus Buttigieg, I choose Bloomberg. Bloomberg versus Klobuchar, I choose Bloomberg. And so I felt like the conversations we're having were black folks in 2020 sort of thinking about voting for Bloomberg reminded me of sort of white folks in 2016 sort of quietly supporting Trump, but not feeling like they could say it in mixed company because it just wasn't the polite thing to say.
And that is because of calculations about his formidability against Donald Trump.
Because we know that black voters are not single issue voters, right? But the single issue that seems to keep emerging is to beat Donald Trump. And that seems to be, as Michael Bloomberg sort of picks off mayors left and right who understand local politics, who understand the electorate, who are galvanizing pastors and galvanizing, we can define that however we need to define that financially or as far as policy is concerned. But it seems as though he's building a grassroots effort. And as Joe Biden appears to be declining before our very eyes, Klobuchar and Buttigieg are relatively unknown. It sort of creates, it seems like it's creating this window for Bloomberg to make inroads with the black community, even with this past record of stop and frisk and so many other things in the city of New York.
But to me, the Joe Biden experience thus far is an illustration of some of the perils of the conversation around electability. And this is not to say, like, Joe Biden is still very much in the race. We've only done 2 of 55 contests. The 2 states that have voted are 90% white and don't represent the diversity of the Democratic coalition. So I'm not saying, like, I'm not writing any epitaphs here. But there was this idea that, like, oh, Joe Biden is the best to take on Trump, and then voters that got to see him up close came to a different conclusion, I think it's fair to say. And now the question is like, well, were the pundits wrong? Was the polling wrong? Were the voters in the early states wrong? And the answer is, who knows? Because you're not shooting at a fixed target.
Well, his brand was, I can win.
Right.
And if your brand is, I can win, and you keep losing, it's not going to hold for very long. I think voters have been chasing their own tails on this question. So everyone's their own James Carville. And they look at the same poll numbers and say, well, he's best in head-to-head matchups. And if he has a stumble or a bad debate performance, well, he's still leading. And then all of a sudden, people see him take a beating in these 2 first states, and they're like, well, I guess someone can beat him. What now?
And this to me is part of what's driving Bloomberg. There's a sort of electability sense that I think, because he's on the early part of the sort of hype scrutiny decline that happens. It happens to every candidate. Like, candidates get hyped, they get scrutinized, they come down a little bit. We've seen multiple cycles of that for some candidates. But there's also this way in which the money he's spending is a message he's sending. It's not just that he's on the air with $350 million. He is saying to people in the Democratic Party, wouldn't it be nice to have a billionaire on your side? Wouldn't it be nice for a guy to roll in here and maybe spend a few billion to beat Donald Trump? Wouldn't you like to see that? And that itself is a message about his own electability.
That's part of the message, but also he has been in so many of these states since Thanksgiving or before, right? And so it's also the power of suggestion. If I hear your message time and time again, if I see your face, and the only thing that I'm hearing are the positives and the policy perspectives that have been detailed just for me. Right? He has been targeting specific voters in particular states
very specifically
for them. And so For those of us who were in New York from 2001 to 2013, we know when we saw all those Bloomberg ads, when our lobbies were littered with Bloomberg literature that was just for us specifically, I think that also power of suggestion is really strong.
Look, I think there are people who say that a billionaire shouldn't buy the election, and they're mostly Sanders and Warren voters. I think the vast majority of Democratic voters, if you said right now, he can buy the election for you tomorrow, they would say, God, please buy the election.
I think that
he's like the train
daddy
true, but
there's
of
a little
2020,
I think
right?
there's more conflict than you're giving it credit for.
I'm just saying I think that people are so focused on beating him
right.
that the idea that they'll stand on principle as far as his money being spent on their behalf, I think is hard to believe.
But this gets to the mental models people have. Like, it was so fascinating to me that Quinnipiac had these head-to-heads the other day, right? The top two performers are the two polar opposites in the field, like Bernie Sanders and Mike Bloomberg. So what are you supposed to make of that? Like, how do you make sense of that data? And then down at the bottom, we're like, was Pete Buttigieg, who I think a lot of people, and for totally defensible reasons, think is like very electable, and he's got good centrist cred, and he's a fresh face, and he's coming from the Midwest. Like, there's arguments to be made on the behalf of his electability, but no one has a model that that rigorously explains that we're asking everyone to be a political science in their own head.
Well, I think there are a few problems, right? We haven't seen South Carolina, but Bloomberg's not in South Carolina, right? So now we have to sort of wait until Super Tuesday to see if this Bloomberg influx actually works. But I think also, I mean, when you said that, people are like, please buy the election today, I think people are of two minds. That's like a long-term and a short-term hustle,
yes.
Right? Buy the election today to get this maniac out of the White House, but we're setting a really bad precedent to say billionaires come and buy elections in the future.
If a billionaire builds a shadow party, history shows that it sticks around and they do things with it later.
I will just say that if you came from another planet or from another country to study America as a society and you saw a Donald Trump presidency followed by a Michael Bloomberg presidency, your conclusions about the strength and vibrancy of American democracy would not be
or maybe if you saw a Barack
positive.
Obama presidency and then a Donald Trump presidency, you might have this question.
Nick Confessore and Christina Greer, thank you both for being with me. That is all in for this evening. The Rachel Maddow Show starts right now.